Dear Lord, we want to thank you again for bringing us together to again sit at your feet and learn more. We ask that the Holy Spirit may impress the truths upon our hearts and convict us of our need and assist us in executing the right response that we may be saved. In Christ's name, amen. Welcome everyone, welcome back. I wonder if there are questions or comments coming from the morning study, or should I just go straight to continue with our study, because I feel like there might be people wanting to say something or comment about the history that I tried to present. Otherwise, everyone is free to interrupt as we go through our next study, hoping that I'll be able to finish up. There's a lot to share as always, but time is always the problem, but that's okay. Let me try to get to where we ended. So the thing is that the world is not ready for gender equality, and it does not want it. And I don't even think that it's capable of achieving that goal, because the history has already set a premise by which, by natural law, the present and the future have to follow the footsteps of history. And in history, we don't have any significant female footsteps in which the girl children of today and tomorrow can walk in. And so the only hope for the world now is this movement, is for us to understand equality and begin to live it. It's the only hope that the world has. And that is why it is serious that the work that we have been raised up to do begins with us learning and unlearning, recognizing and being convicted of our sin, and then working out our salvation with fear and trembling by aligning our thinking and our actions and behavior with the midnight cry message that seeks to liberate women. As we have seen, it's not easy for women to be liberated. Just imagine you are in 1863 and you are a Black man or woman, and slavery has just been abolished, and now you can do whatever you want. But it was not easy for Black people to do whatever they wanted at that time. And we know that the history following that was not a very easy history for Black people. They had no resources, they had no property, they had no education, they were zero empowered. Even with the freedom that they had, they could do nothing much with it because they had no resources. So in the same way, if we can compare with the history of that we are in now, that even though the Lord has declared freedom for women, it's not easy for women to just pick up the mantle and run with it. There's still a lot of baggage that we are carrying from the past, lack of empowerment, lack of resources, even the mindset is not really in the right place. The message is taking time to sink into the minds, to awaken us to the need. So many women are still being dragged behind holding back, afraid to step up, really because they have no confidence to step up, because they have no example to look up to. History has deliberately kept the woman's voice silent. History has a huge gender gap. And so when these poor women and girls are looking back to see, for example, how can I be, what can I be? There is really nothing much to look at. And so it's not a straightforward journey for women. And it's very discouraging because presently women feel helpless and feel like they don't have what it takes. They are unable to face up to the challenges because of society and culture. And that is why culture is part of the scene of sexism, and it must be rooted out. This is a book that I once referenced. I'm not going to look into this section because I already shared it with us, but it was the topic that I referred to that speaks about how women are silenced. Not only has history silenced women, we saw how even if a woman could achieve something, it would not be attributed to her. It would be attributed to the men in her life. And we saw how their histories would be erased, how there were definite, deliberate efforts to make sure that the world did not learn about women that were capable, just so that the present generation will not have role models. And without role models, we cannot learn. A boy child today has plenty of role models in every sphere of life. Role models are everywhere. That's why boys are really young men are really under so much pressure to be achievers. Where I work in the hospital, I come across many teenage boys that use drugs. It's such a serious problem. They become psychotic, mentally disturbed, some of them. And I was intrigued to learn from someone yesterday the reason why, because, proportionately more boys use drugs than girls. I have never come across a girl child that's been admitted to hospital because of drug-induced psychosis. It's definitely always men or young men or boys, teenagers. And it was very interesting, the thinking that is on the ground, because the reason why someone was saying was actually giving this as an explanation why boys are so caught up in this bad habit, and said that boys end up smoking dacha because they have a belief that dacha will make them excel in maths and physics and science, that it sharpens the mind and all of that. So that's not entirely true, of course, but it is what is a conspiracy theory that people believe and actually practice and live by and make decisions based on that conspiracy theory. Even though it's a conspiracy theory, but people believe it and so they go. But the reason why the boys are so much under pressure to succeed, to excel in those subjects, is so they will need to succeed. The push for men to be successful. It's in the culture, it's in the mindset that a man is to be a conqueror, to be successful, to be to achieve. And that is lacking on the woman's side. And the reason for that pressure, it comes from all the role models that they are, that the powerful scientists are men, the rich and powerful men in the world are men. and so there is a disproportionate pressure on men to be successful, which is why they undertake all these risky behaviors, trying to push that end goal. It's not always the case in every instance, but at one level, that's That's why men live risky lives. They're trying to live up to their role models' expectations of society as well. So we went through this, the issue of speech, and I'm gonna jump through this because I don't want to spend time on it. We've discussed how women's voices were silenced and how society continues to silence them even today. So what our dire need is right now is that we need to learn how to hear authority in a high-pitched voice, to hear expertise outside women's related issues, to uplift the woman by giving her the space that she has not been allowed to occupy for 6,000 years. This is what the message demands of us. But unfortunately, we are hardwired with the wrong attitudes, the wrong assumptions and prejudices. Because when a woman speaks on a controversial or unpopular subject, or if she just expresses her views, she's usually that's usually taken as evidence of her stupidity. But if a man says the same thing when he speaks on a controversial subject, or when he plainly just expresses his views, society takes him seriously. Again, it's because of the history, the legacy that we have, the gender inequality, which is our legacy we are pulling from history, the systematic cultural muting of women in the public sphere, and the inappropriate hostility towards women in terms of speech. These are some of the reasons why we lack role models as women. The typical idea of in society is that whatever big important thing that is done by a man until it's proven otherwise. So for example, we will assume that all presidents in the world are men unless specifically specified. We will assume naturally that all CEOs or ministers or people of high standing are men until proven otherwise. These positions in society are resolutely male, and the older, the more influence they yield. This image is what we have of a typically successful person. He's white, he's male, he's middle-aged, and he's the epitome of confidence and capability. If you were to walk into a bank and you want to speak to the bank manager, and this guy comes out and he's white and he's wearing a suit and he's middle-aged, immediately within your mind, you have a sense of confidence, a sense of comfort that this person knows what they're doing and they're going to solve your problem. But if it were to be a woman, let's say she's a woman, she's Black, she is young in her 20s, and she's probably has dreadlocks on, and she's not wearing your conventional monotone colors and is wearing the typical African bright colors, we wouldn't really think and feel that confidence and that level of capability. So this woman has to go an extra mile to prove that she's capable. So that the journey of a woman is so much steeper, especially when she's Black, because of what history has done to us. When we think about a powerful woman, what does she look like? I'm asking a question and I'd like people to respond. What does a powerful woman, what should a woman of power look like? What comes to mind? Anyone? Hello? Or people can't hear me? Maybe I'm not audible.
Now we can hear you.
Okay, what are your thoughts? What does a typical powerful woman, what does she look like? I've already given the clues away.
Hello?
Yes.
So there's no criteria for that. She just have to be natural.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
But you know that if she's as natural as she wants, are you saying that right now in society, that woman will be accepted as she is?
No, she won't be. In the eyes of society now, she has to be that woman who is married, submissive, long hair, high heels. When we're talking of dressing, one who who does the makeups and all that, and also one who, when we're looking at the family setup, the one who is always like making sure the household duties are covered, who is like family orientated, something like that.
Okay, you're describing how society would like to see a woman. My question is much more specific. Is let's say we have a woman president in South Africa. What should she look like?
Okay.
Any thoughts? Okay, fine.
Okay, someone can say it. Yeah.
We know these women. This is Angela Merkel and the president, the I think, I'm not sure if she's still president, I don't know, German, and Hillary Clinton. Just noticed that they are wearing these trouser suits. Why do they have to wear trouser suits? These are some of the most powerful women in the world. There's two issues about them. They speak with a low-pitched voice and they dress in these trouser suits. Like, has anyone ever seen Clinton in a dress? Anyone seen pictures of Hillary Clinton in a dress?
I've never.
Oh. I think online you'll hardly come across that. It's because power is inherently masculine. So for women to reach that level in society, they have to, as much as possible, look like men. Do you get me, guys?
Yes.
Society will only accept a woman who's masculine. So that's why you see these two powerful women, they have short hair, they are wearing these trouser suits, and they speak with a low voice. Why? Because power is inherently masculine. That is why society does not recognize authority in a woman's voice. And that is why if you were to walk into a bank, and the manager is a woman, and she's young, and she has long hair, and she's feminine with all the makeup, you wouldn't have the same degree of confidence as if it were this man, middle-aged, with his blue suit. It's because when we look into history, we do not see women of power. We don't see female Alexander the Great. We don't see we don't see figures like historical figures that we know of power that are female. So we attach subconsciously, because history has taught us this thing. If you are to take the books of A.T. Jones, the historical books of A.T. Jones, or read the Bible, or go to any secular history books, the heroes are 90% of the time male. You understand? They are men. So in history, history tells us power belongs to men. So history informs the present and the future. So because it does that, even now in history, because we don't have a female Alexander the Great counterfeit, therefore, when we come into today's society, yeah, we don't have wars and big things happening like Alexander conquering the whole world. We have, normal life to life, activities. People go to banks. So in the bank, Alexander the Great, who's going to solve your problems, is male. And this is the one that provokes confidence and comfort in society generally. We can use another example. It happens in medicine. People have more confidence in male doctors than in female doctors. Male lawyers than in female lawyers. The top powerful people in the world are usually male because power is masculine. Therefore, any woman that manages to rise up to the level of power that that is designated masculine is under pressure to look the part. This is deep-seated sexism. Because why can't Clinton be who she is without having to wear a trouser suit? Ideally, she should just be herself. She should just exactly dress in a way that makes her feel happy, and society should be ready to accept her. But the thing is, society is not ready to accept such women, so they have to try and look the part.
Hello, dear.
Yes.
So it's like the template of power is masculine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Without all these things that men do, you are not powerful. You don't have power. You are just viewed like someone who is weak and all that.
Yeah. That's why in ancient, where did we find this? We saw this in ancient society. In ancient society, if I can go back through my slide work, we met this woman. Let me just go back to that slide. Remember this woman? Is it her? No. This woman. Sulpicia was a Roman poet. For years, her work was not thought to be hers because it was too good. You understand? So in Roman society, if you did something that was exceptionally good, you had to be a man. Only men could do that kind of thing. And we also remember that the study I did the other time is that if a woman could stand up in public and defend herself, then she was not really feminine. People would ridicule her. They called them, do you remember the word? Does anyone remember the word that was used to describe women that could perform like men? No one remembers. Here is the word. Androgyny. Or maybe some people didn't attend that lecture. Androgyny. So this is Messiah. Messiah was able to speak in public. She successfully defended herself in court. And the argument that was presented as to why a woman was able to stand in public and speak and defend herself is because she was androgynous. She had male characteristics. Because the ability to speak in public, the ability to wield power is a masculine attribute. That is why, and that's Roman society, that's like plus 2,000 years ago. So why do you think Hillary Clinton and Angela Merkel dress like men? It's the same thing. It's the same thing. Society will only listen to a woman if she sounds or looks like a man. Why? Because we have refused to accept gender equality. A woman cannot do what a man can do. That is the umbrella understanding in society that is propagated through culture. And as I said this morning, culture is not a class, it's not a subject. You don't attend a class and they teach you how to be sexist and say, today's topic is sexism, how to be a perfect sexist. No, it's communicated through role modeling. That whole role modeling, that model by which we learn from one another and propagate bad cultures. And these cultures are bad, but we consider them to be sacred. The reason why all heaven was beholding in the 1850s, heaven was beholding human beings abusing other human beings, reducing their fellow human beings to the level of brute creatures, is cultural. Even when you look at racism, society believed that white people were superior mentally, psychologically, intellectually to Black people. And till today, people still generally believe that white people are more intelligent than Black people. And why? Because all the great inventions have been done in Europe and other countries. In Africa, we hardly have anything that we can consider as something that we have done. And yet, that is not true. It's not true that Black people are less intelligent. We're talking about resources. I go back to the story of the Black men and women in the US who have just been liberated from slavery, but they have no resources. They are uneducated. They are not empowered. And therefore, going forward, they're going to be judged based on where they were in that time, their status at that point. And I'm saying that it's the same thing that's the same battles that we have to consider when we're talking about sexism, is that even though women have been liberated now, as far as our movement is concerned, they are still struggling because they have this baggage of a history that is saying to the woman, you are not capable of doing it. So according to Greek culture, women who aspired for power were abusers of power. They took it, they did so illegitimately. Those who did aspire was, as it were, androgyny, hybrids, not women at all in the Greek sense. They were to be silenced and put back in their place. And what is the one event that as a movement we can point to? It's even a historical prophetic landmark in our history, where women were ultimately silenced externally. It was in 2016 when the United States had the option to choose a woman president, and then they chose a man president. That was the ultimate prophetic point when the woman was silenced and put back in her place. Because since the 1900s, the late late 1800s and early 1900s, when women were beginning to fight for equality. There's a lot of advancement that was made progressively, step by step, when we're getting to the point where women are allowed to vote, where women are allowed to go to school, where women are allowed to have abortion, family planning rights, and all of that. We were progressing until we came to 2016. And then in 2016, when the world had an opportunity to do what was right and select and give women the ultimate, most powerful voice on the planet, they chose to silence her and put her back in her place. So no wonder this year Roe versus Wade is reversed. It's the woman being put back into her place, the place that Gracious has described already. She must be in the kitchen. She must put on her makeup, wear her high heels, look nice for her husband, cook his food, and keep his house clean. That's what happened in 2016. So rather than the progress that had been made being endorsed in the most ultimate manner possible by choosing a woman president for the greatest nation on earth, she was silenced and taken back to the bedroom. Because with the reverse of Roe versus Wade, it's the last coffin nail in the coffin to say, woman, go back into the bedroom and do what you are meant to do, which women have decided is your role, which is ultimately in the bedroom. That's why the deepest, most intimate sexism happens in the bedroom. And it is the most sensitive place. And it is the place that is most protected by sexist people, even women themselves. So sexism is cultural, and it manifests in our actions and in our speech. Elder Tess referred us to a documentary on Netflix about Jimmy Savile. This is a typical representation of modern sexism and how it plays up. And we can see that his voice in this story completely overshadowed the voices of many, many women that he abused. Culture is like a firmly planted tree. On the surface is where you see the patriarchy, the marital sex abuse, the domestic violence, the buying and selling of women, the silencing of women. And buying and selling, I'm not just talking about lobola, but the human trafficking that we know about that by and large affects women. This is what we see on the surface. It's the manifestation, it's the tree on the surface that you see. But deep down, underneath the ground lies the myths, the assumptions, the beliefs, the culture as it has been established at a subconscious level. That women's brains are different, that we are controlled by our hormones, that gender inequality is biblical, that women are sinful. Remember, Adam blaming Eve, and that they owe men sex. And this is what culture looks like. It's layers and layers. Right in the center is the assumptions. And the assumptions began in Eden when Adam began to resent Eve because of what transpired and refused to take responsibility for his own part in the sin. And even though God showed favor to Adam and Eve, Adam refused to show favor to Eve. And so for 6,000 years, sexism has weighed down heavily as a curse upon the human race. But it's all built on assumptions. To assume that a woman is less intelligent, that's an assumption. There is no science to prove it. It's an assumption, it's a conspiracy theory, but when it takes root in the minds of men, it becomes a it becomes a commandment of men that is taught as doctrine. And so it assumes the status of a value. But the value, that value or that principle that begins to form in the mind will manifest externally in the artifacts of life, the behavior, the attitudes, which are very sexist. Culture is present everywhere. It's omnipresent, it's omnipotent. It is the statue of Daniel 2 that must come down. It's so powerful. It's the world takes it at the same level as they take God. So much, in fact, that sometimes if any of you gets a chance to read the newsletter and read the article that Cobus wrote, and he talks about how culture, that people would rather keep the culture safe. They would rather break God's law than transgress the culture. This culture is socially constructed. It's not biological. You can't quite grasp it, and it is acquired subconsciously. This is why it is so dangerous. And when it's acquired subconsciously, it then expresses itself in words and actions, and then it gets transmitted from generation to generation through the role modeling methodology. So we don't have to be taught it directly. All we have to do is to observe the people around us, how they are behaving. So if in our movement, we do not begin to change our behavior, we will continue to influence each other in sexism, and the sin will never be rooted out of our lives and out of our movement. And then what will become of the world? Culture is what the people love and hold sacred, and is not rooted in religion, contrary to popular belief. Especially Christians, we are notorious of this one issue, of intertwining the gospel with culture. We take our culture, the man-made rules, then we put a religious spin on it by quoting verses and passages, and then we teach it to the people as doctrine and hold them to it. It's not a religious discussion. It impacts on men to think and expect less of women. It impacts on women to think and expect less of themselves. If the world thinks women are second-class citizens, they must be that. Culture, through society, molds monsters. These monsters are both male and female. I want to quickly open up the other PowerPoint that I wanted to share. Does anyone have a comment? Before I proceed? Oh, people are so quiet. Oh, I don't know if they're here. I don't know if they understand or.
We understand, it's straightforward.
Okay. This is straightforward. Okay, fine. Fine. All right, let's continue. So this last part of my presentation is really to consider what we've looked at, how culture came about, how sexism developed in the mind of Adam, and how it's been transmitted from generation to generation through the learning model methodology, and how in history, even though we were to desperately try to look back and try to find something positive, it's very, very difficult to find it for the good of women and girl children. then we have to look at, you know, how to move forward in terms of abolishing sexism, because this is how we need to approach it. This is how we need to view it. The way that the world dealt with racism is the way that we need to deal with sexism. And I think Elder Tabo, it's in Elder Tabo's article. I really recommend this quarter's newsletter. It's powerful. And I just want to especially thank the editorial team with the Rasedi, Erica, and Karabo for the tremendous work that they're doing there. Because these articles that have been featured this quarter are really very useful in teaching us many things. But in one of those articles, it is said that if the world does not deal with sexism the way it dealt with racism, then it will never overcome sexism. I think it's in Elder Tabo's article, that we in our minds, we don't view sexism as serious as racism. The problem, even in our movement today, is that we overlook sexism. We brush it aside when we see it. We don't want to take it as a serious issue. We want to overlook it and just move on. Like, why are we making a big deal with it? But if I may ask a question, how did the world address racism? It is simple, it's not complicated. Anyone. What happened when the world was brought to a head concerning racism? What happened? A big event happened. What is it?
Repeat your question, dear.
When the world was faced with racism, and when there came a time in life when racism had to be dealt with, what was the event connected with that? Any of us? It's simple. It's simple. It's even on the reform line.
The Holocaust.
Holocaust.
Sorry, may you please repeat your question?
Okay. When we want to deal with sexism, we must go back and look how the world dealt with racism. Isn't it there are three curses that the world is suffering under? It's the curse of sexism, racism, false worship, and racism, right? And, first it was sexism, then false worship, then racism. And we know from the line of restoration, those curses are being reversed in the opposite direction. First it was racism, then it was false worship, now it's sexism. So if we have to deal with sexism in the right manner, we have to go back and look at how racism was dealt with. So the question is, how was racism dealt with? If you could name 2 or 3 or even one significant event that marks the point where racism was dealt with, what is that event? One or 2 or 3, you've already mentioned one. What is the other one? Let me start picking people by name.
1945.
1945, yes. Thank you, Tato. And that's what Gracious was talking about. The Holocaust. There was a huge Holocaust 6 million people died, boom. They were dealing with the issue of racism. What's the other one?
Civil war.
The Civil War. Thank you, Nombo. It's so obvious. The Civil War was like the first point in history where you have the United States go to war with itself over the issue of slavery. The issue of slavery was about racism. Now, and then what's the third event? That one is much more local. You could think of many events where racism is being dealt with. In South Africa, what was it? Because South Africa was a sore thumb in terms of racial race relations. It was the ending of apartheid. I know that one is not prophetic, but the Civil War is, and then you have the Holocaust, which is also prophetic, but then you also have the apartheid and the ending of apartheid. So those significant events that involved war and the death of millions of people were addressing the sin of racism. So until the world is ready to deal with sexism, the way it dealt with racism is not going to make any progress. In fact, the issue of gender equality and the issue of feminism and all of that should have brought the world to conflict status if in fact the world was making any progress in addressing sexism. But instead, what happened? They chose Trump over Hillary, and then they've reversed Roe versus Wade, and God only knows how things are going to escalate downwards for women going forward. Because the world has refused to fight against sexism the way it fights against racism. That is why even in our minds, you know what? As a Black person, it's easy for you to feel racism from another person, from another race. You can sense it. Someone doesn't even have to open their mouths to speak. Just the way they behave. If you go to the malls and you see how people relate with one another, people of different races, or when you are in a work environment where you have to interact with people of another race or people of another nation, because race is just an umbrella term that even talks about xenophobia and nationalism and tribalism. You know from just the facial expression or the words that a person speaks that they are being nationalistic, they are being xenophobic, they are being, just a simple question. We are so sensitive to issues of nationalism and racism. But when it comes to sexism, we don't see it, we don't name it, we don't stop it. Because we can't even identify it. Even those of us that are suffering abuse, even those who are victims, women themselves, they struggle to identify sexism for what it is. And you cannot root out a sin unless it can be identified. So to become a true abolitionist, it requires a miracle. And that miracle came in the form of the Midnight Cry message. The message that in the midst of darkness just came and shone a bright light to show the way to heaven for God's people, and that we need to walk on that path. So we need to become true abolitionists. If we are to root out racism or sexism, we have to become true abolitionists. This is the gender equality index from the Human Development Report. And I'm just digressing a bit. The colors in deep red are the ones that are most genderly unequal. And the lighter the color, the more they have implemented gender equality. So countries like Canada, Sweden, Iceland, this like Scandinavian countries up here are doing very, very well. And in Africa, look at Africa, it's mostly red. We are the most sexist people, Africa and Asia. according to the Population Matters Report 2019, it says that women and girls continue to be discriminated against across the globe, with 4 out of 5 women living in the lowest scoring countries. According to this index, no country has yet achieved absolute gender equality, of course. 40% of the world's girls and women live in very poor countries, about 1.4 billion. Worryingly, the report found that the indicators under the Sustainable Development Goal 5, which talks about gender equality. What is a Sustainable Development Goal? Okay, the UN comes up with this plan and these goals that they're going to impose on countries to bring about development, socio-economic development, because the United Nations wants to bring about equality of the genders, equality of economies, equality in every respect. So poor countries want to be lifted up and advanced countries to share their knowledge, the whole world, so that, you know, the UN is pushing for that kind of peace and equality coming into the world. So they have these 20 sustainable development goals that they are working towards by the year 2030. Goal number 5 is about gender equality. And in 2019, they say that concerning gender equality, it is the one goal that is least achieved. It is the goal that is most behind. You understand? They have all these goals, implementing, you know, good health, free education, economic growth, environmental, protecting the environment, all these wonderful goals. Countries are rushing, trying to achieve these goals by 2030. But the goal that has the least success, the least progress, is the one concerning gender equality. This is so sad. The world does not want gender equality. They are fighting it tooth and nail. Almost all the 10 lowest ranking countries are in Africa, where fertility rates remain high. So what are we saying? Gender equality is not being achieved in the world. And Roe versus Wade was a landmark taking us into that direction. And guess what? 40% of women in the world live in poor countries. How will the scientists and the artists and the powerful people and the technologists rise out of these 1.4 billion people when they don't even have economic power? They are living in the poorest countries in the world. So they don't have resources. And then gender equality facts. 1 in 5 girls is still married before 18. 1 in 4 girls is out of school, out of secondary school. 1 out of 4, which is like 25%. Over 800 women and girls die in childbirth every day in 2022. The total number of women and girls subjected to harmful practices like female genital mutilation and child marriage is still growing. The total number of women with an unmet need for contraception is still growing. And now they've just outlawed abortion. In the US, other countries are just gonna follow suit. Half of women in low to mid income countries have no decision-making power. Half of women in the world have no decision-making power over their own bodies. So what's the impact of gender equality? Gender inequality? What gender inequality is doing is that it's not even good for the men. They said that if women could become economically empowered the same as men, $12 trillion would be added to the world's economy. Imagine what the world could do with $12 trillion. It could turn all these poor countries into the countries that are between developed and underdeveloped. Gender inequality breeds domestic conflict. the negative self-perception, the decreased ability for men to form healthy relationships, difficulty collaborating and forming healthy relationships. You cannot form a healthy relationship with someone who is not at your same level. It's not possible. The only successful marriages we have under patriarchy are because the woman has decided to surrender completely to the man. It is not because of gender equality. It's because she has given up. She has decided to live with the situation. And society has been living with this situation for 6,000 years. There's economic inequality, chronic stress leading to low self-esteem, shame, self-doubt, economic inequality with poor health for everyone, particularly boy children. I've shared this before. When you have a woman who's not educated or not economically empowered, her babies suffer the most, especially boy babies. So it's not good for boys to have a mother who is poor and unable to provide, who is under the control of a man who's not able to self-determine for herself. And it leads to poor economics. So gender inequality has impoverished countries. And if we go back to this map, this map is so interesting. Where you see gender equality is where you see economic development. Where you see the reds, where there is more gender inequality, those are the more poor countries in the world. So gender inequality and economic prosperity go hand in hand. Gender inequality does not help anyone. It does not help the perpetrators of patriarchy. It does not help the children that they got born generation to generation. It doesn't help women. It does not help countries and nations. It has been a heavy curse upon the world. And it affects men, gender inequality, because it promotes the macho man idea, the whole risk-taking behavior, the desire to win, the need for emotional control, risk-taking behavior, playboy characteristics, sexual promiscuity, self-reliance, I'm a man, I'm supposed to, it's my job, I have to stand up. And that's why there's so much violence amongst men. And that's why there is a disdain for the LGBTQ, and there's the power over women that expresses through rape, the rape culture, violence, pornography, and the female objectification, the pursuit of status. As I mentioned before, this argument I heard about that boys like smoking dagga so that they can excel in maths. Is that pursuit, that desire to win, to conquer, to be great. Men have that, they're driven by that because of patriarchy and gender inequality. And really they deny their nature in order to achieve a status that is not even called for. Gender equality is the last sin that needs to be addressed. And if it could be addressed, it would solve many problems of this world. We know about female objectification. I will not go into that. But scientists have shown that men's health is under threat because of gender inequality, the high rate of promiscuity. Society has accepted the fact that men can have many girlfriends, that a married man can have side chicks. Even the women, the wives have accepted the fact that there is a side chick, and the side chicks have accepted that there is a wife. Everyone knows their status. Life goes on. Everyone is happy. That promiscuity leads to high rates of STIs, including HIV, cervical cancer, prostate cancer, lower life expectancy among men, high death rate from violence and accidents and war. You just need to go to Google and search. The majority of victims of motor vehicle accidents and war and violence is men. So how are we to blot out this grievous sin? So this is what an abolitionist looked like in the history of slavery. It was a person who favored the abolition of a practice. It's a person who sought to abolish slavery during the 19th century. This is what is called for in our time, the abolition of sexism. So I want to place the two side by side so that we can compare them. The abolition of slavery, the abolition of sexism. During the history of slavery, the personal had to become political. That is why there was an American Civil War. If the personal had not become political, there wouldn't have been any war. And the majority of abolitionists were white people, and they were religious white people. Abolitionists saw slavery as an abomination. They saw slavery as an affliction on the United States, because this was the reason for the Civil War. They sent petitions to Congress. They sought for the immediate and full emancipation of slaves, not halfway, full, complete emancipation. So likewise, when we are addressing sexism, the personal must become political. Men should be heavily involved in the work of being abolitionists. Sexism should be seen as an abomination. It should be seen as an affliction on the world, and in the church. And we should be watching the laws and the court rulings and everything around that setup. And we should be seeking for full and immediate emancipation of women. That's why in the movement, there is zero tolerance for the abuse of women. It's not even when it's identified that a woman is being abused, everything that can be done has to be done to take that person away from that situation. Because we cannot walk through this progressively, little by little, and leave someone suffering because we are still thinking how to do this thing. In the time of slavery, those that were abolitionists and religious had to now run for office because the personal had become political. They inundated the South with anti-slavery literature. They wanted slavery abolished radically. We might not be able to run for office, but voting has to be, we have to make sure we go and vote for the right parties that would fight for the freedom of women. We have to learn and increase in the knowledge of the truth and be radical feminists, because it cannot be liberal feminism. It's too diluted, and it's too compromising, and it's just burying its head under the sand. And it treats sexism as if it's not something really serious. So the message as a whole, the message in its totality concerning sexism is that, number one, you must be able to see it. In order for you to be able to see it, you must be able to understand its characteristics and how it manifests and how it influences society, how it influences people personally and society. We have to see it, and then now we have to call it by its right name and stop it. To see it, I always still wonder that there are people who profess to be members of this movement, but do not follow Elder Tess's messages. They are not watching the videos, they are not reading the articles, they are not doing their own research, they're not, and how would you see it? We have questions still coming through from people in the movement that have already been addressed by Elder Tess. It means that people are not watching. Because if you're not watching, you're not going to learn, you're not going to understand, you're going to be able to identify sexism for what it is. And you might be experiencing sexism. You might be a victim yourself, even as a woman, and not be able to identify it for what it really is because of not following the message. So we have to increase in knowledge. Acts of Apostles 4:71, Paul put into words his desire for the Colossian believers, the desire that God has for us now. How high the ideal that those words hold before the follower of Christ. They show the wonderful possibilities of the Christian life and make it plain that there is no limit to the blessings that the children of God may receive, constantly increasing in a knowledge of God. They may go on from strength to strength, from height to height in Christian experience, until by his glorious power, they are made meet to be partakers of the inheritance of the saints in light. So we need to increase in knowledge. In our understanding of sexism must become so refined that when a situation of sexism arises, you're able to identify it because you can see it. Naming it. But sin is not to be lightly regarded. The Lord has commanded us not to suffer wrong upon our brother. He says, if thy brother trespass against thee, rebuke him, Luke 17:3. Sin is to be called by its right name, and it is to be plainly laid out before the wrongdoer. Many times when sexism is laid out in our movement to wrongdoers, they are fighting it. But this is the work that must be done. We must approach each other and say, you are being sexist. And I don't have to get angry about that. All I have to do is recognize that the Lord is using someone to direct me into the right path. It's nothing personal. It's about correcting our behavior. It's about being convicted of our sin. And we are all in a learning process. We are still uprooting deeply seated cultural beliefs. It's not easy to uproot these things. We shouldn't be quick to be impatient with one another because we have been approached and rebuked. This is the work that must be done. Stopping it, of course. If thy hand cause thee to stumble, the Savior says, cut it off. It is good for thee to enter into life maimed rather than having thy two hands to go into hell, into the unquenchable fire. And if thy foot cause thee to stumble, cut it off. It is good for thee to enter into life holes rather than having thy 2 feet to be cast into hell, Matthew 9:43-45. If to save the body from death, the foot or the hand should be cut off, or even the eye plucked out, how much more earnest should the Christian be to put away sin, which brings death to the soul? Sexism will bring death. If we don't give it up, sexism will bring death. Whether you're a man or a woman, if we don't give up sexism, we are not going to make it as the 144,000. This is about radical feminism. The word radical means relating to the root. Radical feminists aim to dismantle the entire system of patriarchy rather than making adjustments to the existing system. So in our lives, this is not a time to make room for feminism. No, it's a time to uproot patriarchy. We must practice radical feminism, and it requires for us to completely take it by the roots out. And what's in the roots? If I can just go back to the image where the roots are. Oh, it was in the previous PowerPoint, so I can't share it. What's in the roots down there is the beliefs, the culture, the values, the principles. Whereas what we see on the surface is the lobola system, the patriarchy. But down there is the convictions of the mind. And so to completely eradicate patriarchy, we've got to go to the roots, which is in our thoughts processes. And some of the requirements of radical feminism, of course, it's a bitter experience, separating women from abusive husbands, sanctioning abusers, the immediate actions that are taken. It looks scary, but that's what a radical abolitionist does. Are there any questions or any comments? I have come to the end of my study. I hope I haven't bored anyone or been too repetitive with myself, but I hope that the subject is clearly understood and the work that we have to do in order to become part of the 144,000. It's a high calling. It's a high calling. Okay, if there are no comments and no questions, let's close in prayer. Let's pray. Dear Lord, we want to thank you for leading us. Thank you for opening up to us what you expect of us, and that is to be able to clearly identify sexism and to call it by its right name so that we can eradicate it from our lives. May you bless each person here and the families that are represented here, that we all may be faithful to the message, practice it, and qualify to be part of the 144,000. Lord, that none of us will be lost. Thank you for hearing our prayer in Christ's name. Amen.